Nobody warns you about the moment. You don't get a countdown, you don't get a chance to prepare. One day everything is fine, and then suddenly it isn't. A phone call, a conversation, a number on a screen, a silence where there used to be noise. And just like that, the ground shifts underneath you, and you're standing in the middle of something you never asked for. Most people, when that happens, do one of two things. They either fall apart completely, or they pretend everything is fine and quietly fall apart on the inside. And both of those responses make sense. They're human. But there's a third way, a way that's been around for over 2,000 years. And the people who discovered it weren't therapists or self-help gurus. They were soldiers, slaves, and emperors. They were people who had lost everything, people who had every reason to break, and somehow they didn't. They were the Stoics, and what they figured out about surviving the worst moments of a human life is still to this day some of the most useful wisdom ever written down. So, if you're going through something right now, if life has hit you recently, and you're still a little dazed from the impact, stay with me. Because these 4 things won't fix everything overnight, but they will give you solid ground to stand on when everything else feels like quicksand. The first thing is this: feel it without feeding it. There's a version of Stoicism that people get completely wrong. They think it means you're not supposed to feel anything, that you're supposed to become this cold, emotionless statue who doesn't react to pain. Marcus Aurelius didn't teach that. Epictetus didn't teach that. None of them did. What they actually said is so much more nuanced. They said, feel it. Let it move through you. Acknowledge that something hard has happened and that you are a human being who is affected by hard things. That's not weakness, that's honesty. But here's where the discipline comes in. There is a difference between feeling grief and living inside grief permanently. There is a difference between acknowledging fear and spending every waking hour rehearsing your worst-case scenarios in your mind on repeat. One of those things is natural. The other is a choice, even when it doesn't feel like one. Epictetus said that people are not disturbed by events, but by the judgments they place on events, which sounds almost too simple until you sit with it. The event already happened. You cannot undo it. But the story you tell yourself about it, whether it means you're ruined, whether it means the world is against you, whether it means you will never recover, that story is being written in real time. And you have more control over that pen than you think. So feel it. Cry if you need to cry. Sit with it. Be honest about how much it hurts. But catch yourself when you start feeding it, when you start adding extras, when you start turning one painful thing into a permanent catastrophe. That's where you gently, firmly pull back. The second thing is to shrink your world down to today. When you're in the middle of a crisis, your brain does something that feels helpful, but is actually destructive. It projects. It takes this one bad moment and stretches it across your entire future. It says, if things are this bad now, imagine what the next 5 years look like. And suddenly, you're not dealing with Tuesday anymore. You're dealing with every Tuesday for the rest of your life, all at once. That weight is unbearable. No wonder people collapse under it. Marcus Aurelius wrote something that has stayed with people for nearly 2 millennia. He said, confine yourself to the present. Not to this year, not to this month, not even to this week. The present. What do you actually need to handle today? Just today. Not the version of your life that exists 6 months from now in the worst possible timeline your mind has constructed. Today. What does today require of you? What is the single next step? Because here's what the Stoics understood that modern psychology has since confirmed. The human mind can handle almost anything if it's broken into small enough pieces. It's the totality that destroys us. It's the all at once that makes us want to give up. So stop carrying the weight of your entire future when you are only being asked to live through today. The third thing is to ask yourself the honest question. There's a practice that sits at the very core of Stoic philosophy, and once you start using it, you genuinely cannot stop. It is this: separate what is in your control from what is not. Simple to say, brutally hard to actually do. Because when something painful happens, we spend enormous amounts of energy on the wrong side of that line. We rage at the things we cannot change. We exhaust ourselves trying to control what other people think, what other people do, how situations unfold. And every single second spent on those things is a second stolen from the only territory where your effort actually makes a difference. What can you control right now? Your next action, the way you respond, the values you choose to operate by, even when everything around you is in chaos, the small choices you make today that will quietly build the foundation of tomorrow. And what can you not control? Almost everything else. And the Stoics didn't say that to make you feel helpless. They said it to free you. Because the moment you stop fighting against the unchangeable, you suddenly have an enormous amount of energy available for the things that actually move the needle. Epictetus was once a slave. He owned nothing. He controlled nothing about his external circumstances. And yet, he became one of the most psychologically free human beings who ever lived because he understood that his inner world was his own, and nobody could take that without his permission. The fourth thing is the one most people skip because it feels too slow, and that is return to your purpose. In the middle of a crisis, purpose feels like a luxury. You're just trying to get through the day. You're just trying to breathe normally. And that's okay. That's valid. But there is a moment, and you'll know it when it comes, when the immediate survival phase begins to settle, and you need something to walk toward, not just something to walk away from. The Stoics were deeply, almost obsessively focused on this idea. They called it living according to nature, living in alignment with your highest self. It sounds abstract until you get practical about it. What do you actually value? Not what you've been told to value, not what looks good from the outside. What genuinely matters to you when everything else is stripped away. Because hardship, real hardship, has this strange clarifying effect. It removes the noise. It shows you very quickly what was real and what was decoration. And sometimes, the most important thing a difficult season does is hand you back a version of yourself that is more honest than the version you were before, stripped of some of the pretension, stripped of some of the assumptions, closer to something that actually feels like you. Marcus Aurelius returned to his purpose constantly. He wrote it down every single day in a journal that was never meant to be published, reminders to himself, who he wanted to be, how he wanted to show up. Not because it was easy, he was emperor during war, plague, and betrayal, but because without that anchor, everything else drifts. So those are the four things. Feel it without feeding it, shrink your world down to today, ask the honest question about what you can and cannot control, and find your way back to your purpose. None of this is easy. Anyone who tells you Stoicism is a quick fix has never been tested by life. But what these principles offer is not ease. What they offer is solidity, a foundation that holds even when everything above it is shaking. The Stoics didn't promise you a life without pain. They promised you something better. They promised you a self that could survive it. And that, in the end, is the only promise that actually matters.